Hi everyone. So I'm going to answer a question that I had wrong for a long time, and that is, what's the difference between a software developer and a software engineer? Now, I had this wrong for a long time, but I need to give myself some credit. I was actually sort of right, and we're going to get into that. Now, one thing you're going to find in your career is there are the way things are on paper and academically, and then there is the way things actually work in the real world. And that is, in a lot of cases, where the difference comes from here. Now, before anyone gets angry with me, please just hear me out until the end before you start writing an angry comment. So let's start with it. A software developer on paper writes a lot of code. They follow very strict instructions put forward by a software engineer in order to construct the system as a software engineer designed it. So this basically means the software developer could be considered kind of a code monkey. They get very simple kind of instructions, maybe not so simple, but more granular instructions to construct something based on a design that they themselves did not make. Now, before you get upset, realize that I myself am a software developer, and that's not how it works at all for me. But let's move on to a software engineer. A software engineer actually may not write very much code at all, if any. What a software engineer really does on paper is they write out plans, work with stakeholders to write designs, documentation, to basically create, I don't want to say a lot of paperwork, but a lot of designing plans, user guides, anything that you can think of around a kind of large system, except for the code. They also provide things like use cases and test cases. They provide things like instructions for the developer to follow to actually construct the application. Now, if you feel me hesitating a little bit, that's because this is rarely how it's really done in the real world. And any software engineers, if you're mad at me, calm down. I understand that you probably do your fair share of coding. Here's the reason why that is. So different companies work in different ways. And where I work, we don't have any software engineers. I'm a software developer, and I write out plans, I do documentation, I write the code, and I also meet with stakeholders. I write the larger designs, although not always documented forever. But the software developers where I work, we actually plan the entire application or system. Now, that's not true in some other things. I spoke to someone who worked for the FAA working on a very big project to overhaul the entire flight tracking system. So as you can imagine, in something like that compared to writing kind of smaller applications like I do as a developer, you're going to need more people and more thought behind it. And that's kind of what happens, is that when you have the need for more oversight, more planning, more documentation, this is something that's going to be used a lot. It's going to be very widespread, and it's going to go a lot further than just maybe this one little IT, it's not going to just be for one little company, if that makes sense. So then you would probably need the thing where you have software engineers and you have software developers, and they're separate, and they actually divvy out those tasks where the software developer is really writing the code and the engineer is just designing things. Now, this brings us to a little bit of what might surprise you, is that when you hear the word engineer, you tend to think of something that's more technical, and you would think the engineer would be more technical than the developer. And really, that wouldn't really be true, because the software engineer is actually doing more collaboration, more documentation, more writing, more charting, and the developer is the one that's writing all of the code. I found this in technology. When something has the word engineer on it, it can actually mean that it's like less technical, it's less hands-on than the developer role. So again, in the real world, doesn't tend to work like this, that you have software engineers that are probably doing the exact same type of job that I do, where yes, they do meet with the stakeholders, they do the documentation, but guess what? They also write the code and everything. And the reason for this is because companies work differently, and there really is no law that says what a job has to be or what a job title has to mean when it comes to this kind of stuff. You can call anyone a software engineer, and as I tend to say, you can call me janitor for all I care, as long as I'm doing things that I love and I'm getting compensated well for it. So I hope I've explained this a little bit. The main thing to take away from this is that the way it is on paper is not really the way it works in the real world. One thing I want to add is that when you're looking at jobs, look more closely at the skills and less at the title, because there is one more layer of this. Sometimes the people specifying what you do and your title don't actually know what that title means or have any idea. They've just heard it. They think we need someone to write code. So who does that? Well, software engineer. I heard that somewhere. So let's write that down. And what skills do we need them to know? And they find the skills they think are applicable, and they put those all down on a job application, and you fill it out. And it turns out you know a lot more about this than HR did. Now, this isn't true everywhere, but even in places where it's not true, there are different companies that just have different definitions of what these roles do, and for good reason. Different companies, different organizations, they do different things. And this is even true within a company or organization, that a different department might have a completely different way of doing things. And that is just perfectly okay, but yes, it does lead to a lot of confusion and questions that come up all the time, like this one. Now, this is not the only job title out there that brings about confusion. Like, there are software architects as well. How does that differ from a software engineer? I'm not going to get into that in this video, but I hope this answered this question for you, although I do realize it's not a very satisfying answer, probably, but at least you know how it works on paper. So if you liked this video, please give me a like. If you didn't, you can give me a dislike. If you really liked it and you want to see more stuff like this, please subscribe. Have a good night.